All right, so are you into ghost stories? Because today we are diving into some of Canada's most haunted spots.
Spooky.
Yeah. And we're using a list from Phantom Stories, a show for paranormal enthusiasts.
Yep.
But we're not just after chills, right? We're looking for patterns.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Think of it as a spooky puzzle. We have all these places across Canada that are said to be haunted.
Yeah.
But is there something that connects them? What makes certain places, more prone to holding on to, let's say, echoes of the past?
Right, exactly. It's a good cross-country ghost hunt. But for answers, not just goosebumps.
Yes.
And right off the bat, two places kind of jump out at us. Both grand hotels, both with tragic tales. The Fairmont Banff Springs, picture perfect, right? In the Rockies.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Fort Garry Hotel, a historic gem of Winnipeg. So what's fascinating is that in both hotels, the central figure is a woman who met a tragic end.
Yes. At the Banff Springs, it's the bride ghost. Supposedly a bride who died on her wedding day, fell down the stairs, so the story goes.
Oh, wow.
And at the Fort Garry, it's room 202. Legend says a woman hanged herself there.
So you're checking into this luxurious hotel, maybe for a happy occasion, and then suddenly you learn about this dark event that happened, well, right where you're standing. That adds a whole other layer to the experience, don't you think?
Absolutely, and it makes you wonder, are hotels particularly good at, holding on to this kind of energy, the energy of sudden emotional deaths?
Oh, that's interesting.
If you think about it, hotels are places of constant transition, people coming and going, joy, sorrow, all under one roof.
Right.
Maybe those emotions leave some kind of imprint, like soaking into the walls,
Okay, so maybe hotels are ghost magnets.
Maybe.
But why the woman in white? We see her at the Banff Springs, and guess what? She pops up again on our list at Craigdarroch Castle in Victoria, BC.
Oh, wow.
Another stunning place, but also from the Victorian era. Is there something about that time period that makes this ghostly figure so common?
It's a question that intrigues researchers in the field of paranormal studies. The woman in white isn't just a Canadian thing. She's in folklore worldwide, often symbolizing loss, betrayal, unfinished business. But in the Victorian era, you have this perfect storm of factors that could amplify this image.
Oh, lay it on me. What kind of storm are we talking about?
Well, death was much more present in daily life back then, Disease was rampant, infant mortality was high. Imagine the grief, the constant awareness of mortality.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you have the rise of spiritualism. Seances were all the rage. People were actively trying to communicate with the dead.
Yeah.
So is it any surprise that anxieties about death, particularly the tragic deaths of women, might manifest in this recurring ghostly figure?
That makes a lot of sense. It's like their fears literally took shape, almost like they were primed to see ghosts,
Yeah.
But it's not just hotels and castles. Our list also includes some seriously heavy places. Kingston Penitentiary in Ontario, Fortress of Louisbourg in Nova Scotia, and the Old Montreal Prison in Quebec. All with dark histories, Tons of suffering within those walls. Does that kind of collective pain leave a mark?
It's a question paranormal researchers grapple with. Can places absorb intense emotions, especially negative ones? It's called residual energy or psychic imprints. Imagine the energy of countless people suffering, being confined, maybe even dying. Could that energy linger even after the people themselves are gone?
And Kingston Penitentiary is famous for this, right? People report hearing disembodied voices, feeling sudden temperature drops, specifically in the old cell blocks.
Yeah, that's what makes places like Kingston Pen so fascinating. We have these anecdotal reports, these sensory experiences that people claim to have.
Yeah.
Whether you believe in ghosts or not, these experiences are undeniably powerful. It's not just a story, it's something they felt, something that impacted them on a visceral level.
Even the biggest skeptic would have to admit that's pretty creepy. And speaking of creepy, let's move on to the Keg Mansion in Toronto. A gorgeous Victorian mansion, now a bustling restaurant. But the story goes that a maid hanged herself there.
Another tragic female figure.
Are we seeing a connection here to those hotels? It's like there's this thread of women's stories, often ending in tragedy, woven through these hauntings.
It's a pattern worth exploring. If you look at the lives of servants, especially women, in those grand Victorian homes, you start to understand the context.
Right.
What were their lives like?
Right.
What kind of social support did they have? Were they treated fairly? These questions are crucial because they shed light on the potential reasons behind such tragic events.
It's like these hauntings are giving us a peek into history, not just the grand events, but the everyday lives of people, the struggles they face.
Right.
It's not just about ghosts, it's about remembering those who might have been forgotten, right?
Exactly. And as we shift our focus to the coast, to Peggy's Cove Lighthouse and the Halifax Citadel, both in Nova Scotia, we encounter another recurring element, the sea. But before we dive into those maritime mysteries, let's take a moment to consider what we've uncovered so far. We're seeing patterns, tragic figures, often women, locations with intense pasts, and this recurring woman in white. Are we just connecting dots, or is there something more here? Something that speaks to a deeper connection between certain places and the spirits that might linger within them?
That's a good question.
It is.
Yeah. So we've talked about these grand hotels and those chilling prisons with their heavy energy and even a bustling restaurant with a dark secret. What I find fascinating is how these stories are like windows into different times and the lives people led back then.
That's precisely what makes this exploration so compelling.
Yeah.
These stories, they offer glimpses into the social dynamics, the gender roles, the harsh realities of life in different eras.
Yeah.
They're not just spooky tales, they're reflections of history itself.
And now we're heading to the coast, to Peggy's Cove Lighthouse and the Halifax Citadel.
Okay.
It feels like the sea adds a whole other layer of mystery, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sea has always held this mystical quality, this sense of the unknown.
Yeah.
It's no surprise that maritime locations are often associated with hauntings.
Right.
Are these places haunted by the collective grief of countless lost souls, or by the spirits of specific individuals lost at sea? It's a question that continues to captivate and mystify.
Peggy's Cove is iconic, beautiful, but also incredibly dangerous. And then the Halifax Citadel, with its long military history, that adds another dimension. We're not just talking about sailors lost at sea, but also soldiers who died on land defending their country.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, could these places be haunted by different types of energy, like layers of history all overlapping?
It's an intriguing possibility. We often think of hauntings as being tied to, specific events or individuals.
Right.
But perhaps certain locations become repositories for the collective energy of countless experiences, both joyful and tragic. Think of the Halifax Citadel. Centuries of soldiers training, standing watch, experiencing camaraderie, fear, loss.
Yeah.
Could all of that leave an imprint? A sort of energetic echo that sensitive individuals can pick up on.
Okay, that gives me chills. And speaking of chills, the Phantom Stories list mentions some specific experiences reported at the Halifax Citadel. People see spectral soldiers in uniform, hear phantom drumming, feel sudden temperature changes. It's not just a vague feeling. These sensory details make it so real.
And those sensory details are what set these accounts apart from, just mere ghost stories.
Right.
These are reports of specific phenomena that people claim to have witnessed.
Yeah.
Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the impact of these experiences is undeniable.
It makes me think about how we perceive history. Usually it's dates, names, battles.
Yeah.
But these ghost stories, whether you believe them or not, they make history feel so much more personal, so much more human. It's like we're connecting to the emotions of people who lived and died in these places.
Precisely. And that's where the line between history and hauntings blurs. Are these stories simply legends, or are they ways for us to process grief, trauma, and the mysteries of life and death? Perhaps they serve as a bridge between the past and present, allowing us to connect with those who came before us on a deeper, more visceral level.
Okay, so we've got hotels, prisons, a restaurant, and now these maritime locations.
Right.
But what about the woman in white? We've seen her pop up in a few places now. Is she just a common ghost story, or is there something more to her? Is there something about women's roles and societal pressures, especially in the past, that might connect to these hauntings?
It's a question worth exploring further. We know that the woman in white appears in folklore worldwide, often associated with loss, betrayal, or unfinished business.
Right.
But if we look specifically at the Victorian era, a time when these stories were incredibly popular, we can see how societal expectations placed immense pressure on women.
Yeah.
Their lives were often defined by marriage, motherhood, and domesticity. Deviation from these norms could result in social ostracism, or worse.
So you're saying that these ghost stories could be reflecting the anxieties and constraints of women in that era? Like, maybe the woman in white represents those who were silenced, ignored, or punished for stepping outside societal boundaries.
It's a compelling theory. Think about the stories we've discussed. the bride who died on her wedding day, the maid who allegedly hanged herself. These are tales of tragedy, often shrouded in mystery and whispered speculation.
Yeah.
Is it possible that these stories are giving voice to those who are marginalized or silenced in their lifetimes? Are these spirits seeking justice, recognition, or simply a way to connect with the living and tell their stories?
It's like they're saying, remember me, remember what happened. And by listening to these tales, by acknowledging the pain and suffering of the past, maybe we can find a way to honor their memory and ensure that those who are marginalized or silenced today have a chance to speak their truth.
That's a beautiful and powerful sentiment, and it speaks to the transformative potential of these stories. They're not just about the past. They can inspire us to create a better future.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the power of ghost stories. It's not just about chills and thrills, it's about connecting with history, with those who came before us, and with those big existential questions we all grapple with.
And perhaps that's the enduring appeal of ghost stories. They offer us a glimpse into the unknown, a space where the boundaries between the real and the imagined blur.
Right.
And where we're invited to consider the possibility that there's more to this world than meets the eye.
So what can our listener take away from all of this? What should they be thinking about next time they hear a ghost story, or maybe even visit one of these haunted places themselves?
I would encourage them to listen with an open mind and a compassionate heart, to consider the stories behind the stories, the lives of those who might be reaching out from beyond the veil, and most importantly, to ask themselves, what do these stories tell us about ourselves, about our history, and about the mysteries we may never fully understand?
If you were to visit one of these locations, what would you be most curious to experience? What questions would you ask the ghosts, if you could?
Well, it really feels like we've stumbled onto something bigger than just ghost stories here.
Yeah, it's like these hauntings are like tapping into this need to understand our past and maybe even face our own mortality.
It's a profound thought.
Yeah.
And one that resonates deeply with the study of folklore and the supernatural.
Yeah.
These stories, whether we believe them literally or not, they often serve as a way for us to grapple with those big questions. Why are we here? What happens after we die? Are we truly alone in this vast universe?
I've always been fascinated by ghost stories, but I never really thought about it that way. It's like they're not just about fear, but also about connection.
Yeah.
A connection to those who came before us, and maybe even to something beyond our understanding.
Exactly. And think about the recurring figures we've encountered. The woman in white, those tragic brides, the maid at the keg mansion. These stories, so often tinged with sadness and injustice, they invite us to consider the lives of those who might have been overlooked or silenced in their own time.
It's like these women are finding a way to make their stories heard, even if it's through whispers and shadows. And by listening to these tales, by acknowledging the pain and suffering of the past,
Right.
maybe we can find a way to honor their memory and make sure that those who are marginalized or silenced today have a chance to speak their truth.
That's a beautiful and powerful sentiment. And it speaks to the transformative potential of these stories. They're not just about the past. They can inspire us to create a better future.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the power of ghost stories. It's not just about chills and thrills, it's about connecting with history, with those who came before us, and with those big, existential questions we all grapple with.
And perhaps that's the enduring appeal of ghost stories. They offer us a glimpse into the unknown, a space where the boundaries between the real and the imagined blur.
Right.
And where we're invited to consider the possibility that there's more to this world than meets the eye.
So, what can our listener take away from all of this? What should they be thinking about the next time they hear a ghost story, or even visit one of these haunted places?
I would encourage them to listen with an open mind and a compassionate heart, to consider the stories behind the stories, the lives of those who might be reaching out from beyond the veil, and most importantly, to ask themselves, what do these stories tell us about ourselves, about our history, and about the mysteries we may never fully understand?
If you were to visit one of these locations, what would you be most curious to experience? What questions would you ask the ghosts if you could?
That's an intriguing question. Perhaps I would just sit in silence and listen, hoping to pick up on the whispers of the past. Or maybe I would ask them about their lives, their hopes, their fears, and what they've learned from their experiences, in the afterlife.
I think I'd be too scared to ask anything, but I love the idea of just listening, just being open to whatever might come through. It's like a reminder that there's still so much we don't know about the world, and, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the mystery that keeps us curious, that keeps us searching for answers.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive into Canada's most haunted places, I encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of discovery alive.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. And if you've had your own experiences with the unexplained, or if you have any thoughts or insights you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep an open mind and remember, sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.